Anyway, we're gonna say okay. So the other way so it's a 6. The other way we can do it is we can use the formula. So I'm gonna say it's mode number 2. So I could use my formula going backwards. That would be the easy thing to do, because if I was on Ionian, the formula is whole step gets me to the Dorian. So one whole step gets me to the Dorian. So going backwards then would be one whole step backwards. If I know my numbering, 6 minus 2 would get me to 4. That's note number 4, which is a C. That's a lot easier than saying I'm on a D, and then if I go backwards, it would be a D flat, and then a C. That's going to get quite tedious. It's a lot easier to say, oh, I know a D is note number 6, and a whole step represents 2 notes back. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 is note number C, right? But what if I wanted to go forward? If I wanted to go forward, it's going to be way up here, right? Because it's 1 step back. So how many steps forward would it be then? We'd have to say, well, if I was on the Dorian, I got to get down to this Ionian. So what would be the formula? Well, I skipped that whole step, and then it would be 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 would get me back to the Ionian. So I could count that up, right? It would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it would be 10 half steps up, which again, if I look at if I knew the math, and it was on 6, I'd say, okay, well, it's 6 plus 10 is 16. There's only 12 notes in the musical alphabet. 16 minus 12 is basically 6 minus 2, which would be 4, right? And 4 is a C. Or I could count it out. I can say, well, 6 minus 1 half step gets me, 6 minus 2 gets me to 8. 8 minus 1 half step gets me up 1. 6 plus 2 gets me to 8. 8 plus 1 gets me to 9. 9 plus 2 to 11. 11 plus 2 gets me to 12, 13. But it goes around the horn. There's only 12 notes. So back to 1. And then 1 plus 1 half step gets me to 3. And then finally, 3 plus the 2 gets me to 4. So obviously, in this case, it would make a lot more sense to go back 1 than go up that distance. Now, most people are going to know possibly their intervals from the major's position. So if someone says they're in the Dorian, you're going to say, okay, well, if I think about the range of the Ionian or major to the Dorian, major to Dorian, which I would think of as a modal range of an ID or an Ionian Dorian modal range, you're probably going to be tempted to say, well, if I make the Ionian the 1, what would be the 2 or the Dorian related to the 1, right? So and so I would say, okay, I think I got a little messed up there, right? So from the perspective of the major, what's the Dorian? Well, it's the second one up. It would be a 2, and that would mean that it would be a 2 note away major second. So that means that I would go, if I was on the Dorian, I have to go 2 backwards, right? I'd have to go 2 backwards. So that would be the general idea. And so you can look at it from a scale degree, but the scale degree people usually know best from the major. So you're most likely going to switch your perspective from a scale degree standpoint to the major, right? And then try to figure out what the scale degree is, and then you have to go back, to the major, and that would be the general idea. I'll try to explain that better next time. But if we kept going back, these would be all the half steps for the formula going back. So let's try it again. Let's see if I can explain it better this time and say someone says they're on the Phrygian. Now, people don't play in the Phrygian all the time, but sometimes you do. You get that Spanishy sound sometimes with the Phrygian, right? Mostly you're going to be dealing with Aeolian and other than the major. But let's say we're on the Phrygian. So they're like, okay, we're playing in the Phrygian, and let's just say E Phrygian to make it easy. We know where it's going to end up. C is going to be the major, right? But we're going to say it's E Phrygian, right? And we're like, oh, dude, if I go to my fretboard over here, I know where the E is. I know where the E is. That's like the open E. That makes sense and whatnot. But I don't know my collection of notes unless you give me the relative major, because that's how I know my perspective, looking from space to see where my perspective should be. So how am I going to figure it out? Well, I know that the Phrygian is the third absolute mode. It's the third absolute mode. So what would make sense? Should I go forward until I get back to 1, or should I go backwards? Well, it's 3. It's gonna make more sense basically going backwards. So if I'm on the third, I got to go back 2 modal half steps. So it would be easier if I say the E is up here, and then I go back 2 modal half steps, which is going to be 1, 2 modal half steps. So if I know my shape, I can kind of see that. I can see that on my shape and say, well, 2 modal half steps back from the Phrygian will look like that, right? Because I might know what the Phrygian shape should be from that perspective. So then I can count it out. Notice the 2 modal half steps back is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps back, right? So that's one way we could do it. We can also say then that I'm going to use my formula or my intervals. So let's go back on up and say, all right, well, what if I say there it's the 3, I'm going to go up. What's my formula? Well, if I'm on the Phrygian here, then it would make sense to go up. So the formula is whole to get me to the Phrygian. So I can see that's going to be a 4-note distance if I was on the C to get to Phrygian. So I'd have to go back 4 steps back from the Phrygian to get to the major. So in other words, if I was here, I'd say if I was on note number 8, which I'm calling E, 1 whole step back gets me to 6, which would be D, and another whole step back would get me to 4, which would be C. If I count those 2 up, that's a distance of 4, which in essence is the interval, which we'll talk about intervals later. I would like to name it, though, as a modal range, meaning this is the Ionian or the 1-3 or Ionian to the Phrygian modal range. So within that modal range, you have a 4-note away. It would be a 4-note away, which would be a 4-note away second modal half step, which would be a scale degree term of a major third. A major third. I kind of fumbled that up, but sorry about that. I'm trying to get the language all straight here. And so that would be the distance. So you can see it by basically interval. So most people would look at it from a scale degree and say that if I'm going from the 1 to the 3, from the perspective of major, it'd be a 4-note away major third. So then I'd have to back out 4 to get there. Or we can count up. So if I counted up from the Phrygian, we'd say, okay, so if I started here, it'd be 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 to get me back to the Ionian. So if I went up to get around the circle, then we can go, okay, it went 8. I have 8 here, and we're going up 8 up 1 to 9, and then going up from 9 2 to 11, and 11 plus 2 gets me 12, and then back to 1, and then 1 plus 2 gets me to 3, and 3 plus 1 finally gets me to the 4. So what's the distance there? We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which makes sense because to go the other way, it was 4. So if I go this way, it's got to be 12 minus 4, which is going to be 8. So what's the modal range for the 3, 1, or the 3, 1 modal range? It's going to be, an 8-note away, half step away distance. And then if you look at it from a scale degree standpoint, it's going to be an 8-note away, which would be a minor 6, which we'll talk more about scale degrees later. Let's try another one. Let's say that now we're on the Mixolydian or the Lydian. We'll say we're on the Lydian, and so they say, okay, we're on F Lydian. All right, so okay, F Lydian. We're like, oh, dude, F Lydian. All right, so if I go over here, I'm like, here's an F right there. I can find an F, but I don't know what the collection of notes are because I need to know the relative major scale to do that. But I know that the Lydian is the 4th, right? It's the 4th mode. So then I can say, well, that means would it be easier to move forward or backwards? So it's getting pretty close to either way. I could say it's going 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So if I went forward, it would be 4, and then modal half step, 5, 6, 7, and then 1. So I can go forward that way, or it might be easier to go backwards sometimes. So if I'm like, all right, here's the F right here, so it's the 4th going up, so I'm going to go back for 1 modal half step back, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if I know my shape on the guitar from a Lydian point, wherever that Lydian point is, if I know my shape, because I know the Lydian as the bottom of this box, and I know the shape is always the same, even if it was shifted up or back because I was playing in a different key, then as long as I can find the Lydian, I will know the shape, right? I'll always be able to find the shape, because that's the beautiful thing about the guitar. It's completely symmetrical. But if I don't know the shape, then I can say, okay, I can use my formula, right? I can say, and by the way, if you're on the piano, what are they going to say? They're going to say, hey, look, what I need to do is there's always going to be A through G. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to count backwards and be able to find the relative A through G. But the problem with that is that doesn't work unless you have memorized which keys have the whole steps and have all the sharps and flats in it, which is something that's not worth doing really on the guitar. It's only worth doing if you're reading classical old sheet music or you play the piano, because that tells you what position your fingers go in for the black notes on the piano. It has almost no relevance on the guitar. And sheet music, by the way, which we'll talk about later, is written not very nicely to the guitar because we don't need the sharps and flats, right? So it would be, so there's a better way to do the sheet music. So we'll get into that later, but just in case you're I just want to do my little rant on that one. So anyway, so if we're on the Lydian, so we're on the Lydian here, we can go back up, so to get to the Ionian. So if we do that, so we could go backwards. So let's go back on over. All right, so here is this one. So we're going to say, all right, so now we're going from note number 9, which is an F, and we're gonna go back 1. So notice we're going up, shifting up this way to go back because of the staggering of the whole steps and half steps. And then we're gonna go back 2 to get to 6. So 8 minus 2 gets to 6, and then 6 minus 2 gets us to 4. So what's the distance? It's gonna be 2, 4, 5. So most people would look at this from a scale degree standpoint and say, okay, let me look at it from the perspective of the major. So if I was on the Ionian and I was going to the Lydian is the 4, so it would be a 5 note away perfect fourth. We'll talk about that later. I think it would be better to be able to memorize the modal ranges both ways, which I would call a 1-4 modal range or Ionian to Lydian modal range, right? And to be able to recognize the range going the other way, a 4-1 modal range, right? Because that way, again, the distances between all the modes are the same. You don't need to make it the 1. What you want to know are all the distances between all the modes. They're always the same, right? That's the thing that would be best. But again, the naming convention is going to get you back. So if I went from the 1-4 modal range, I'm going to say it's a 5 note away. It's going to be a 5 note away third modal half step, which would get us to the 4th scale degree, right? Okay, but a 5 note away perfect fourth. Anyway, so then if I could go the other way and say, what if I went the other way on my formula? So now I'm on note 9 plus 2 gets us to 11. 11 plus 2 gets us to 1 because it's 12, and then 1. 1 plus 2 is going to get us to 3, and then 3 plus 2 is going to get us to 4. So if I went from the 4-1 modal range, what's the distance? 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. So it's going to be 2, 4, 6, 7. It's a 7 note away. We would call that normally from a scale degree a perfect fifth. I would call it a modal range of a 4-1 modal range. A 4-1 modal range has a 7 note away fourth modal half step, which would be the scale degree of a 7 note away perfect fifth, right? I'm trying to get my terminology correct because again, I'm trying to not get sucked into the scale degree, which is difficult even for me, even still, as I practice this, because that's the normal convention that people have. But what you want to be able to do is be able to say, I can say that this is a 7-note away perfect fifth without forcing myself to say this is the one, right? Most people can't do that though. Like if I wanted to look at it from the perspective of the C, I can't. I have to force myself to say that the C is the tonic or the one in order to think about the distance. But it's possible not to do that. It's possible to say, hey, look, I'm just looking at it at the 2, 4, 5, the 5-note away perfect fourth as just a distance. I'm ignoring the fact that it says fourth, which makes me think of the one. I'm just looking at it from a distance terminology, not as a scale degree. That's not how most people do it, though. It's hard to do that because we're trained to keep on changing the number system. So I think it's easy to practice, or good practice, to try to think of scale degrees and what I would call modal half steps, which will always be one less than the scale degree, so that you don't end up renaming. All right, let's try another one. Mixolydian. So we're going to be on Mixolydian. So they're like, okay, we're on G Mixolydian. So we're like, oh, gee whiz, G Mixolydian. Could you be more specific?